I had another really interesting conversation with someone who just handles financial aid, because one of the things that I've been doing is taking a look at, student loan debt and its relationship to financial aid and how financial aid gets calculated. Okay, the calculations are pretty straightforward, and to be perfectly honest, they're quite fair in terms of they look at in the U.S. the income levels of the parents, any savings that the parents have done for the education, um, the income of the student, and savings, et cetera, there, and they come up with a figure of what's called a need, sort of a family contribution. Okay, and what's interesting is that contribution is done by a company associated with the College Board, and each school is supposed to sort of have that same figure per for each student. So what's interesting is there's a certain amount of price fixing, and a bunch of schools have gotten busted for price fixing in terms of their financial aid, in terms of colluding with how much financial aid they're going to give particular students. Um, and what this person was saying is that they actually have a matrix, a graph, where that they use to calculate student financial aid payments, and what they expect the debt of the student to end up with. But they aren't necessarily making those calculations of what the student is going to end up with in terms of debt public to that student. Their goal is to sign them up for as much sort of the debt as possible, to get them to pay for their school, to get them to come to the school. But then when they're there, they're not being transparent about the long-term ramifications of servicing that debt. And so the reason why I bring it up with you, Jesse, is that there are the tenured track faculty isolated from those economic decisions can kind of claim, or essentially tries to claim, the moral high ground of higher education isn't a business, how it's not a consumer-driven industry, that it's in some higher purpose. And certainly for some that's accurate, maybe, but they don't see that there are all these support systems underneath them, literally, okay, in terms of the hierarchy of power at the university, that really is about commerce and exploitation, and not being transparent with the costs. And so you get, the staff members who would like things to be more fair or more generous, or more, actually a system where there was competition for keeping costs low, but they're kind of like shuttled off into the nether regions, and what really is, placed front and center is this notion of tuition, debt, and power that is maintained by the current tenured faculty and the administrations. And that was really the dissertation, and now the book that I wrote, people have said to me that was, wow, that's fairly cynical what you wrote. And now I'm actually finding out that it's even more cynical once I start to, it was cynical on what was happening with adjuncts. Okay, now there's a whole crazy thing going on that we didn't really see, that literally is taking students without much debt, giving them these dreams, and saddling them with a huge amount of debt that allows them to be controlled afterwards. And that's kind of sick. And we'd love to hear from people who have their own stories about this, who are working in the industry. We'd really like to get those kinds of stories out, and they're important to get out, because reform's not going to happen unless we let some light into the current practices.
Then 2008 becomes this threshold where, after that, there's like a critical mass of people in society for whom it's not working. And in particular, there's young people for whom the whole deal that they've been offered just doesn't seem to be there anymore.
Simple access to the internet, right? And with the right inspired disposition or perspective on what learning means for anyone, I feel like we can very, very quickly change the discussion on how do we find the next $1 trillion of funding for for the next generation of higher ed learners, and how do we inspire them to sort of create their learning for themselves?